For years, she was one of the loudest, most fearless voices in American commentary. Candace Owens, a name that sparked headlines, debates, and digital firestorms. She was outspoken. She was controversial. And she was never afraid to say what others only whispered. But in the final months of 2024, that voice disappeared. No new interviews. No viral tweets. No speeches. For a woman who had built an empire on being heard, the silence was deafening. Journalists speculated. Had she finally been cancelled? Supporters worried. Was she taking a step back, or planning something bigger? Critics claimed her time was over. But those who understood her deeper knew one thing. Candace Owens never leaves without a reason. Behind that silence, something was happening. Reflection. Strategy. Transformation. This wasn't retreat. It was recalibration. The quiet stretched for weeks, then months. And in a world addicted to noise, her absence became its own statement. Because when the loudest voice in the room goes silent, everyone listens for what comes next. When she finally reappeared in 2025, she didn't just speak. She reignited a national conversation. And once again, America was listening. Before she became a headline, she was a voice. Before she became a debate, she was a dreamer, a young woman who believed ideas could change the world. Candace Owens' rise was anything but ordinary. She didn't come from political privilege. She didn't inherit influence. She earned it, through conviction, charisma, and courage. In the mid-2010s, the internet became her stage. While traditional news stuck to scripted narratives, she spoke directly to the people, unfiltered, unapologetic, and unpredictable. She challenged systems. She questioned the mainstream. She rejected political labels and dared to think independently. Her message was simple: don't follow the crowd. Follow the truth. And that message resonated. Millions who felt unheard suddenly found a voice that echoed their thoughts. Her critics called her dangerous. Her fans called her fearless. But both sides agreed on one thing: she could not be ignored. Every appearance sparked reaction. Every word made waves. She wasn't just a commentator, she was a disruptor. By the early 2020s, Candace Owens had transformed from internet personality to cultural force. She appeared on major stages, political panels, and international interviews. People either loved her or loathed her, but no one was indifferent. She embodied a new era of digital leadership, where one person with conviction could rival entire media networks. Her rise wasn't powered by politics, it was powered by people. And in that rise, she revealed something profound about modern America, that the real power no longer lies in government, it lies in influence. By 2025, America was not just divided, it was fragmented. Families couldn't agree at dinner tables. Friends avoided politics in conversation. Social media had turned into a digital war zone. And right in the middle of that storm stood Candace Owens. Her voice, her presence, her ideas, they cut through the noise like a blade. She didn't soften her tone for comfort. She didn't bend her words for approval. She spoke what she believed was the truth, raw, direct, and unfiltered. To her supporters, she was a light in a dark sea of political correctness. To her critics, she was a fire, one that burned too hot, too recklessly. Owens challenged the mainstream narrative on culture, race, identity, and responsibility. She talked about personal empowerment in an age of victimhood. She argued for accountability over excuses, action over outrage. But the reaction was explosive. TV anchors debated her every sentence. Hashtags trended overnight, some defending her, others calling for her silence. The media either celebrated her bravery or condemned her rhetoric. Yet through all of it, her message stayed the same: you don't have to agree with me, but you should be allowed to speak. And that's where the real division began. Because her fight wasn't just about politics, it was about principle. She became the center of a much larger question. Where does free speech end, and social peace begin? The message that divided America wasn't born from hatred. It was born from honesty. A brutal, uncomfortable honesty that forced the country to confront itself. Because deep down, what people feared wasn't Candace Owens' words, it was the reflection those words created. America was now living in two realities. On one side, progressives preaching reform, inclusion, and change. On the other, conservatives defending tradition, order, and identity. And in between them, Candace Owens, a lightning rod for both admiration and anger. She didn't fit neatly into either camp. She questioned both sides. She called out hypocrisy wherever she saw it, and that made her unpredictable. Some nights she'd be celebrated as a defender of truth. The next morning, she'd be criticized by her own supporters for being too blunt, too independent. Owens had become more than a personality. She had become a battleground. Her speeches weren't just political, they were philosophical. She talked about what it means to be free, how culture shapes identity, and why courage has become a form of rebellion. But every idea came with resistance. The internet split into factions, memes, clips, reactions, hate comments, fan edits, every second of her words dissected and weaponized. And as the ideological clash deepened, something strange happened. The debate stopped being about her. They became about us. Because Candace Owens wasn't just reflecting her own beliefs, she was reflecting a nation at war with itself. One side shouting equality, the other shouting truth. One side demanding change, the other demanding preservation. Neither listening. Both convinced they're right. Owens stood in the middle, criticized, misunderstood, and yet undeniably influential. She reminded the world that ideology isn't just about politics. It's about emotion, identity, and belonging. And that's what made her dangerous. Because she wasn't fighting one side, she was fighting the system of sides itself. This was no longer a conversation. It was a collision, a clash between two Americas, each convinced the other was the problem. And Candace Owens? She was the spark that revealed the fire was already burning. After years of controversy, headlines, and division, Candace Owens disappeared. Not literally, but spiritually. Her voice grew quieter. Her online appearances became rare. The firebrand who once dominated every conversation suddenly went silent. And in that silence, something powerful happened. She evolved. Behind the scenes, Candace was rethinking everything. Her tone, her message, her purpose. She realized that while she had sparked debate, she hadn't yet built something lasting. Words were powerful, but words alone couldn't heal a nation. So, her comeback wasn't just about returning to the screen, it was about reclaiming meaning. When she finally spoke again, her voice was calmer, measured, more reflective. She didn't shout. She reasoned. She didn't accuse. She questioned. She didn't divide. She connected. This was a new Candace Owens, not the rebel looking to provoke, but the reformer trying to rebuild. In interviews, she talked about learning from chaos. She admitted her tone had once fueled anger instead of understanding. And that took courage, the kind few public figures ever show. Her comeback message was clear. We can't fix what we refuse to face. And we can't unite by silencing one another. That line alone went viral, not because it was loud, but because it was true. Her followers returned, this time not as an army, but as a movement. Even some critics began to listen, not because they agreed, but because they finally saw growth. Candace's comeback wasn't just political, it was personal. It wasn't about reclaiming fame, it was about reclaiming purpose. By the end of that year, she wasn't just part of the conversation, she was leading it. This was a rebirth moment, proof that even the most polarizing voices can find balance through reflection. Because true power isn't in winning arguments, it's in changing hearts. Candace Owens' story had started in America, but by 2025, her voice was echoing across the world. She was no longer just an American commentator, she had become a global conversation starter. In Europe, leaders debated her warnings about cultural decay and media censorship. In Australia, students discussed her ideas about identity and personal freedom. In Africa, Her emphasis on self-reliance inspired a wave of youth empowerment movements. And even in countries that disagreed with her politics, they couldn't ignore her influence. Because beneath the controversy, her message touched something universal. Who controls truth, controls society. The rise of AI, digital surveillance, and controlled narratives had made her words more relevant than ever. People weren't just arguing about politics anymore. They were arguing about who gets to define reality. Candace's global reach grew not because everyone agreed, but because she forced people to think. Universities hosted debates around her quotes. Podcasts dissected her speeches. Documentaries examined her transformation from activist to global thinker. And as the world watched America's cultural battles unfold, they began to ask themselves, is this our future too? Because every country had its version of the same problem. Cancel culture, misinformation, polarization, manipulation. Candace Owens had become a mirror not just for America, but for humanity. Her critics said she was dangerous. Her supporters said she was brave. But both sides agreed on one thing: she mattered. And that's what made her story global. By 2025, she wasn't shouting from the sidelines anymore. She was sitting across from presidents, analysts, and thinkers, discussing freedom, censorship, and leadership in the digital era. The same woman who once divided her own country was now helping others understand the cost of division. Her transformation became a lesson that no matter how loud the world becomes, truth must stay louder. By 2025, the world had changed again. Technology ruled conversations. Algorithms shaped opinions. And truth had become a matter of perspective. But one question echoed louder than ever: who will lead the next generation? Candace Owens had spent years challenging the system, but now, she was challenging something far more difficult: the concept of leadership itself. She spoke openly about how politics had become performance, how leaders had become influencers instead of servants, and how courage was being replaced by conformity. Her message wasn't about right or left anymore. It was about responsibility. In her speeches, she said things like, "Real leadership isn't about power, it's about principle. We don't need louder voices. We need wiser ones." And this hit differently. Because people were tired of division, of media wars, of leaders who spoke without meaning what they said. Candace began mentoring young creators, activists, and thinkers, not to follow her, but to think for themselves. Her focus shifted from arguing with systems to building new ones. She encouraged people to create their own platforms, to stop seeking validation, and to start owning their influence. Candace often said, "If the world won't give you a seat at the table, build your own." That line became a movement. It was printed on t-shirts, quoted in universities, used in debates across continents. In this new phase, Candace Owens had gone from being a political figure to being a teacher of leadership. Her evolution reflected a universal truth, that leadership in the 21st century isn't about control. It's about clarity. And clarity requires courage, the kind that doesn't shout, but stands still when everyone else runs. By 2025, Candace had become an example of something rare: a leader who learned, who adapted, who grew, without losing authenticity. Her story showed the world that true leadership isn't inherited or elected. It's earned, through experience, humility, and purpose. This was the future of leadership she envisioned, a world where influence came not from power, but from principle. Every story needs an ending. But some stories, like Candace Owens, don't end. They evolve. Because this isn't just her story, it's a reflection of our time, our fears, our voice. Candace's journey, from outcast to influencer, from fighter to thinker, represents the modern struggle for truth in a noisy world. She proved that being misunderstood doesn't make you wrong. That standing alone doesn't mean you're weak. And that silence, sometimes, speaks louder than outrage. In her final message, she said something that defined her evolution. History doesn't remember who shouted the loudest. It remembers who stood for something real. Those words echoed far beyond politics. They spoke to every young person who felt voiceless, every creator who felt censored, every thinker afraid to speak up. Candace Owens' story wasn't about winning debates, it was about reclaiming courage. The courage to question. The courage to be different. The courage to speak even when your voice shakes. As the credits roll, her voice plays softly. If my words do anything, let them remind you that truth, no matter how uncomfortable, is still sacred. And that's how the story ends, not with a fight, but with freedom. Freedom to think. Freedom to speak. Freedom to lead with purpose. Because at its heart, Candace Owens' journey is not about politics. It's about humanity. It's about rediscovering what it means to stand for something, even when standing alone.